Tennessee State hockey is not far away. The program has moved into phase 2 of their team building as they found their head coach to lead them into the future. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Now, we wrap up today's episode with a look at Quay Davis, who used to be with Jackson State, used to be with Texas Southern, thought was about to be with FAMU, but maybe, just maybe, because we can't say confidently, could be about to be a Grambling Tiger. Time will tell. But we kick it off with a two-part about Tennessee State hockey. They have found their new head coach, and that is a part of moving into phase 2. If you will allow me, before we hop right into it, I'm very happy. I think I expressed something that sounded different yesterday because I did a lot of something's wrong with the NFL draft coverage. And it was just an overall negative tone of the show. And I did feel like that was necessary to discuss, but I also, in my negativity, felt like I was kind of neglecting the fact that this show, Locked On HBCU, has been extremely versatile. More versatile than it had been in the past 2 springs. This is my 3rd spring doing this show. And we talked way more about basketball after the season and after the tournament. We've talked about baseball multiple times, which is something we haven't really done. We led off a show with baseball, guys. Like, we have to understand, you have to understand that is not how this show has operated for the last 2 years. We've spoken about track and field already, which we've done a little bit, but we've spoken about gymnastics and the national acclaim of a Morgan Price, of a Kirsten Johnson. Like, this show has been more versatile, and it's something that I texted my friend because I was leading in and knew I was going to open this up with hockey. Y'all hear me? I'm opening this up with HBCU hockey. This doesn't even exist yet. I'm very prideful in the fact that this show has been versatile in the way that it has been over the last month and a half. Yes, it came at the expense of football, and I'm a football guy through and through. But before I'm a football guy, I'm a producer, I'm a host of this show, and the versatility makes me smile. So I wanted to combat my negative tone, my pessimistic tone from yesterday with what is a much more glowing light. And I think that the light of positivity is stronger than the light of the negativity of that situation. Now, before I go and sound sappy and overly positive and what all that stuff, let's move into this, because Tennessee State has hired Duanté Abercrombie as their new head coach of hockey. And we have to remember, not only is Tennessee State opening up a hockey program for the first time in school history, this is the only HBCU hockey program in existence. So when you're looking at Abercrombie, it's more than just he's leading Tennessee State. Duanté Abercrombie is leading HBCU hockey, period. Not just into the future, into whatever their present is. Like, he's a trailblazer. And this is something that we'll speak about. Duanté Abercrombie is not unfamiliar with breaking barriers. This may be his first jump into it on this stage, but when you look at him as a youth, he was mentored by a Neil Anderson. He was mentored by a Graham Townsend. Both of those men are not only hockey legends, those men mean so much to the black hockey player. Because when you look at Anderson, he founded a youth team that I'm sure he thought was going to be just 1 year, but it ended up being something that expanded so large that now he is the first. You got to remember this. He is the first. Anderson is the first black person to be inducted in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Townsend is the first Jamaican-born, and I think only up to this point, Jamaican-born player in NHL history. Townsend is the first. Like, y'all not hearing me. Abercrombie is not unfamiliar with breaking barriers because two of the mentors that he's had since a youth, with Anderson being the first black person ever inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame, and Townsend being the first Jamaican-born player in NHL history. These are the type of people that he was surrounded by as a young kid. So maybe he had those conversations with them back then. Maybe they just spoke about it. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they're talking about it now. But past and present conversations with guys like Townsend, with guys like Anderson, can help can help Abercrombie move into this. I fully believe that if I'm Abercrombie, I'm reaching out to my mentors. What did it feel like to break barriers? What challenges did you have to deal with when trying to break those barriers? Because though he's not being the first Jamaican-born player in NHL history, he's not looking to be the first black person ever inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Those barriers that you had to break down, they do have a little bit of a parallel to the barrier that Abercrombie is trying to break down with Tennessee State. It's not on an individual level. It's on a team level. It's a different dynamic, but it's a very similar situation. So, yeah, pick those brains. Pick those brains. And I'll say one thing that I think is different, because we had a very similar situation with HBCU gymnastics. We've had a very similar situation with HBCU wrestling. And that's on me, where I need to make sure I get back in and tap in with Morgan State in the way that I should have been doing, in the way that I am interested in doing. But when you look at gymnastics, HBCUs and gymnastics always felt like a perfect pairing, right? Like, oh, there's a lot of black girls who do gymnastics, who practice gymnastics. I think there's a good amount of them who would want to come to an HBCU. The pairing just made sense on paper. So I don't think they had to fight for a demographic. They had to fight for some national acclaim. They had to fight for being taken serious, but they didn't have to fight with us for us to accept them. That's where hockey, I think, is a tad bit different, because this is not our sport necessarily. Doesn't mean we can't play it, but hockey is when you look at the people who are in hockey, this is not a sport for minorities. When you look at the racial percentages in the NHL, like, this isn't even about, culture. No, I think I think it's like 80% white. Like, this is a sport that is not really heavy with minorities, right? So obviously that has some trickle down effect to the younger level as well. I think that the HBCU hockey realm will have to fight for their demographic just as much as they'll have to fight for being taken serious. And I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that instantly, HBCU hockey, we just going to support, period. But I just don't think that's realistic, because you're probably dealing with a bunch of people who are not even hockey fans. So it'll be an interesting barrier. It's a tough one to face. It's a tall barrier. It's a taller barrier than gymnastics, in my opinion. But I think that Abercrombie's history allows him to be able to take on this challenge in the right way. Because when you look at the amount of community outreach that he's done, let me just tell you what Duanté Abercrombie has been awarded or nominated for right now, currently. Abercrombie is nominated by the Washington Capitals in the NHL for the Willie O'Ree Community Hero Award for his work as the inaugural member of the Capitals Black Hockey Committee, and as the co-creator and instructor with the Rising Stars Academy, which is a free program providing elite skill development and mentorship for local hockey players of color. This is not the first time that he's been awarded or nominated for this award. And this is the type of groundwork activity. This is the type of being within the community, developing the type of players that you will have to recruit to fill a collegiate team, that I think is really going to help him not only build a squad, but also build a squad that the community can get behind. Matter of fact, that recruiting is a big part of phase two. So let's put a pause. Let's put a pin in that, and let's expand on what it means for Tennessee State hockey to be expanding into phase two as we continue with today's episode of Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Now, it doesn't matter about procrastination. I hate it just as much as you do, but you will be bailed out on procrastination if you're using Gametime. But who cares? Maybe you didn't want to wait. Maybe you still wanted to jump out early. Gametime is still the best place to get your tickets, whether early or late. That's the place to go because they'll give you a picture of where you're sitting. And if you find a better seat in the same row, they'll give you in the same section, they will give you 110% back on the difference, which means you're making a profit just for being you're making a profit just for finding a better price. That's how confident they are that you won't find anything better than Gametime. Don't care if it's the NFL draft. Maybe you're in Detroit. Maybe you just want to check out a comedy show, a concert, a play, a local sporting event. Maybe I want to go to the Rangers. All right, let me go ahead and go to Gametime. So if I'm a new user, like you may be, I would download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel, and I found a very interesting bet on FanDuel, and it's getting the exact first five picks in the NFL draft right. Not just getting the players, but getting the players and the order. I actually think that's a really intriguing one. What order will Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Marvin Harrison, Joe Alt, JJ McCarthy, I don't think Michael Penix goes in the first five, but these are real conversation. That's about 6 names who could go. Who are going to be the 5 and what order will they be in? I'm very fascinated in this NFL draft, right, for Saints Wire. So this is one of the things that really does pique my attention. But yeah, NBA, you got a couple of really close games. The Celtics versus the Heat is one of the bigger spreads. The Pelicans versus the Thunder is a bigger spread. But games like Timberwolves versus Suns, Clippers versus Mavericks. What's the other one that I can't think of right now? But you have some really close ones. I even think the Nuggets versus the Lakers is really close. So go ahead and go to FanDuel.com. If you're new to FanDuel, get $150 back in bonus bets with your first purchase. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out the Locked on NFL mock draft. So you may have missed the live show last week. That's fine because it's now up. All 6 episodes of the first round are here and they are up on that NFL Locked on NFL draft podcast page. But yeah, Duanté Abercrombie is the new head coach of Tennessee State hockey, and this begins the start of phase 2. For me, phase 1 was all about ideas and planning. It was all about preparation. It was all about logistics. It was all about setting up the idea, putting it into motion, because you had to have conversations about, do we want to do this? What's the marketability of it? What's the pros, the cons? Like all of that planning and thought process and brainstorming. That is step 1. The press conference announcing that we're going to happen. That's phase 1. All of that is coming up with the concept. But now we're building. Setting the foundation is phase 1. But as we break away from the idea portion, as we break away from figuring things out, now we're going into building a team, real coaches. You have a legitimate coach in Duanté Abercrombie. You have a guy who's going to fill out a coaching staff now. You're going to have real games. You're going to have to really schedule these things, real practices, real players. All of this is important. All of these are things that you need to look at. So for me, the next step is recruiting. And I'm really interested to see the racial makeup of this team. I can't tell you that that's meaningful. I will tell you that I'm interested. I recently seen a tweet. That's what I laughed for. But I recently seen a tweet that was basically like, why are some of these HBCU teams not majority black? And there seemed to be a tint of frustration in that. I'm not as invested on that degree. Please don't lump me into that tweet. Don't think that that's my burner account. It's not. But I am interested in the racial makeup because in responding to that tweet, I'm of the mind that it's not an HBCU thing. It's this sport has a certain number of black athletes. Like, for example, they mentioned baseball. Apparently, only 5% of NCAA baseball is black. That was crazy to me. But that's a legitimate conversation. It's not about, oh, HBCUs just don't want to support black. Like, I feel like that's how that person was trying to spin it. That ain't what I'm doing here. I'm interested in the racial makeup because I'm not as keen to the state of hockey and black hockey in particular. I'm not. So for me, this is going to tell me something. How much interest is there? Because I'm not sure. I'm uncertain. I've told you before, this is not the perfect marriage that gymnastics is. And I grew up close to the stars. Hockey was never my thing. I don't like Dallas sports in general, outside of the Rangers, but they in Arlington. So they're in the AMA. But that's not my cup of tea. That being said, there's enough prominent sports to dim the shine of the stars, right? Like, I don't know a single black person who plays hockey personally. I don't know them. I know that they exist, but I do not know them personally. So, I mean, in Nashville, it's a little different because you don't have as much of a collection of teams, right? Like, they have the Titans, and that's it professionally. It's the Titans and the Predators. So hockey may be bigger in Nashville. I'm about to go to Nashville very soon, so I'll let you know. Maybe I'll talk to some people. Yeah, maybe that's what I'll do. I should go out there and talk to some people while I'm there. Write that on the list. You hear that? We got to go ahead and do it. Wow. I don't know how I didn't think of that. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit off track. The point is, Nashville seems to be bigger with hockey. And that's why I think that partnering with the Nashville Predators is a very smart thing to do because it brings a little bit of credibility to Tennessee State hockey immediately because you're partnering with them. And it'll probably get you some resources as well. But I just want to know, what does their first couple of recruiting class look like? Because I think that a big question is, can they pull a Morgan Price? And what a Morgan Price is a athlete, in her case, gymnastics, in this case, hockey. It's an athlete who could go to a bigger school. She was committed to Arkansas, could go to a bigger school, but decided to come to an HBCU. And though I don't know about the black hockey scene, I can imagine that most black people who play hockey are one of the few, unless it is a black team and that's you bonding together. Unless it's kind of like the Black Student Union, I could imagine that it's probably a big minority that you're in. I could easily see somebody who is used to being the minority their whole life in their sport want to go somewhere where that's no longer the case. Somewhere where inclusion isn't something difficult to fight for. Something where, I mean, hey, when you have that much of a minority, or when your minorities are that little a part of the game, they're going to have to deal with racism. I'm confident in that. I'm confident in it. And I won't go too much further, but I would assume that if the sport is only made up of like 7% of, I think it was black, Asian, and something else, not Hispanic, I don't believe though. If it's only 7% of that, I can guarantee that those guys are dealing with racism. I'm not saying you won't deal with it at HBCUs, but you won't deal with it from your home team. You won't. You might deal with it from the others. You may still have to hear the racism, but it's where it's coming from. I could only imagine still having to go hit the puck after hearing some racist. All right. Anyway. And last thing I'll say is I think it's very interesting that hockey is what's leading Tennessee State's expansion. Tennessee State's athletic expansion is going to be going for the next couple of years. Hockey is the one that's on the forefront because it's never been done. So they're kind of like pushing this athletic expansion, but you're also going to have baseball for men. And then on the women's side, you're going to have soccer, diving, and swimming. This is very interesting. You're watching them get more and more diverse. I don't know how many diving and swimming teams that HBCUs have, but I would assume that it's a little bit rare. But you know what? Let's move into Quay Davis. Let's get back to football because that's the thumbnail for today. I know many of you are like, well, where's Quay Davis? Here he is. And the real question is, where is he going to be? FAMU? Grambling? But don't cook me. Who knows? We'll try to answer that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. And I've been told that I have a competitive side, and I think that is true. And when it comes out, it's fierce. It's ferocious because I'll be chilling until I'm not. Okay, so yeah, I have a competitive side. We all do. And my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. And I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly, the classic. You have the crazy locations, you have the typical Monopoly board, but now you can play with hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations to build up amazing cities. And I love the leaderboard because I get to involve my friends in this. I get to see who is the Monopoly tycoon of our friend group. I get to see, can I charge them rent? And if they charge me rent, right, they taking my money. Now I need to go see if I can rob their vault of riches. So my competitive side is itched and I love it, but also I get to team up with friends. So it's also that sappy side of me that you saw at the beginning. Go ahead and download Monopoly Go for free at the App Store or Google Play. Download Monopoly Go wherever you get your apps. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Grambling is now in the mix for Quay Davis. Now, I don't know if you paid attention to the trajectory of Quay Davis, but it's really been fascinating to watch. And each step of the way, it gets more and more interesting. We all thought that he was going to be a FAMU Rattler because Quay Davis committed to FAMU. He is committed to FAMU. But as the legend Lee Corso would say, not so fast, my friend. Davis has been seen on Grambling's campus. I've seen him in the locker room. I've seen him putting on the pads. He's obviously interested in FAMU. What I have not heard is that he's decommitted, or excuse me, he's obviously interested in Grambling. What I haven't heard is that he's decommitted from FAMU. And he might not know exactly where he wants to be. He's been at Jackson State. He's been at Texas Southern. He's been committed to FAMU, and now he's showing interest in Grambling. I don't know if he knows where he wants to be. Well, one thing I do know is that he knows he wants to be in the SWAC. And I'll break down why that's not the worst thing in the world for him to not know where he wants to be honest. But it is important because it shows 2 things. One, the NLI, not the NIL, but the National Letter of Intent is the only binding thing in this whole process. Everything else is just words. Ain't even a pinky promise, right? Like you'd be like, hey, for real? Yeah, I got you. But if you want to know if it's for real, you go ahead, you lock them pinkies, right? That's when you put the pinky promise. You can't break a pinky promise, right? Maybe I'm showing my youth or whatnot, but that was a real thing when we were younger. It's still to this day. The words are yeah, I'll do it. The National Letter of Intent is the pinky promise. You can't break that. They can let you out of it, but you can't just break it. Once you sign that, once you put ink, what Drake say, once you put pen to the sheets, I'm Team Kendrick though, just so you know. But once you put pen to the sheets, that's when it's real. That's when it's legitimate. There's no moving off of it. So one thing that's important to remember is that the National Letter of Intent is the only binding thing in all of this. The second thing is Quay Davis is a little bit indecisive, period. He just is an indecisive person. So as far as the commitments not meaning a thing, until he signs that letter of intent, which isn't going to be until May, he's just a commit. And just like any other sport, once you commit, you can still go view other places, right? So like, say I'm a high school senior and I've committed to Texas Southern. I can still go view Southern Texas. I got to use a fake university because I'm riding for my Tigers. I ain't going nowhere else. So just because I committed to Texas Southern does not mean I can't go view a Southern Texas. Doesn't mean that I can't go view a junior college. Doesn't mean that. It just means that I'm committed to this school. That's true, but you don't really see that in the transfer portal as much. And then the second thing is Quay Davis is indecisive. And I'm not saying he's being indecisive. He is indecisive. I've seen enough of a repeated behavior. And once you do something enough times, the context around them disappears. Like, he committed to 3 different schools in high school before signing his letter of intent. And the way I view the whole indecisiveness is, say you with your girl and she don't know what she want to eat, or maybe she acting like she don't know what she want to eat. You can do the runaround. The runaround is going to be annoying. But once you get to that restaurant, if the food is good, you really don't care. That's how I feel about Quay Davis. He can not know where he wants to be. Once he decides, if it works out, who cares? Maybe that's not an exact science because he's decided he wanted to be at two different places that didn't work out, but he left Jackson State for what I believe to be a quality reason. I think he left Texas Southern for what I believe to be a quality reason. I get it. He keeps trying to land in new spots. If it works out for him, it works out for him. This guy has been so swag, right? He's swag. He's been in so much around the swag that I just want to see him succeed wherever he goes. I think that I still would go to FAMU because I think that the wide receiver situation is a little bit more open. Grambling, I don't view it as open as FAMU's is. And Grambling does have a better quarterback situation, but I'm looking at, I don't care who the quarterback is. If I'm swamped down on the depth chart, that's irrelevant. So I'm looking at depth chart first, quarterback second. I will go to FAMU. They have a lot of talent, but their talent is very new. So that's the way that I look at it personally. Personally, that's how I look at it. But on tomorrow's episode, we'll keep pushing. We'll be knocking this thing out, and we'll be back with Grambling because in my research about Grambling's quarterback or mostly the wide receiver situation, I found out that Grambling's in a quarterback battle. Miles Crawley is in a quarterback battle? Shocked me. But we'll expand on that on tomorrow's episode of Locked on HBCU. But until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.